How? Kewe yuxatini takat Johan. Kwashi satin yata wa yahai. Ya kawe eka hasa ani aya takdin tan. Okay haswatian se tluk nach ati. Tu you sak hasta ani. Tu Ye ewe kwashi satin ya sha. Ya kwashi sakua sa atwune. Chak. Ya do we Ya tag. Te wushachit. Kunach wushachit. Teat Tlein awe. Teat Tlein. The cut we sha kanach awe je satan. We teat Tlein. Yet the cut we ask Kwani at the Howe I was at the cut at Ye awe kwa akwa we kleinach ka gastin yudu sagen tsagwe dich husati. Kleinach as awe uyech sha shaki. Qonneke uwe ik Khatia achtke. Yag we dia nach Jaguta as Kwane kutzati. Qonne ye has yaw saka. Esau tua ach. Shetsin awe atut has ajiwati. Aka awe tsusani. Qonne ajiwanak. Yag. Qonne awshe yachis as Kwani. Ye awe ayachyati aya ya uhan ya yidat. Wan qanins adat yu tuchte tanchu oya tleinach gwaltachnach awe oyach. Achu gwal wooch sakachtu da ach aqa awe. Cheltsin hatu de yeqati. Yad atsu takt yaqne takt kuwa ha. Ya ach tlil gutlein dana waq. Hu owe ya waqa. Yisatina gesha shaki. As Kwani kutzati yu. Kwashadat tusha atk. Wasa has kutzati. Yag qatlan ayawe tlaid. Chaqnachoyal. Kachlidzi. Shaki has kutzati. Kashaya. Ajawe atgitayich. Chuya wushchin has a shat. Ade has the khat. Wooch in sati. Ye awa hakusti. Ya wushchin tulshat. Ya klingit ane qeeg. Yewacht was a good judach away ye achi. You go ayach kwan the cut Johan. Gwach Johan so a dat you to the tan. Chidzi ya klingit stu tu. Plague. Kesh ulzi. Kesh ulzi klingit rinach wuchin you atki. The stuk at the heen. A gawa ye gachkit lak the cut Johan. Gulchish yach 80 sa achi. Gulchish. What he to us a good lingit rinach you atki. Helwasaqati. It had late kak inach wuchin you gachtil at da.
Leikachenach.
Singit rinach shukwa gat late kak inach. What he to us a good late kak inach helwasaqati.
Achlewch genich lle twch naw ach diw
Okay.
yachan.
A tina chayati gwallat halli twch i ni go. Llydzi hwn gan un slingit rinach yw gall atgyn. Okay. A dach dy si yw yn nechi. تلقتين يا أخو آخ جدي خدنا
خاصكو
اوكي
كوداخ كوسيات كا أوديغان
جدي خاني يا يدت دي أو أداتي تختتن كنكتي أتينا خايتي قش كاكين كداتس كنكتي صاغ قن ديون أديتسو قنخيكي كلاخ تواشكو خدسو آتي نو ها شكاهاتي كيك خدسو ديخ شكاهاتي كيك تلك ييز قنخ شكاهاتي خستي
Asquani.
يا أوا أسقواني الشيش يوهان الشيش. Okay, what was I saying about this one?
You were talking about some big waves at first, I think.
There was, one giant wave.
Okay. One giant wave.
Okay?
One giant wave.
Oh,
You mentioned someone at the top of the ridge saying, "Can you hear me?"
yeah, awa. Yeah, awa. To Yisukuge, to An Kasai, aya. Kusa. Let's
Was he trying to warn the people that the wave was coming?
What is a team where are you high? Yeah, there what? Do Akwan Ani Hunakau Shitka Yakwa to let Kakinach Letuya Bay to Koa Ekasai Yak talk Te Wushik Gisuke Wushik when Kanins Tekadi Yudosak Glade Kadi Tekadi Kut Kadi Yatayach Sukuke Wushik. What might those things be? Tekadi, Kadi.
Avalanche caused a wave, or
An avalanche is late Kadi. So what would Tekadi be?
Landslide.
Yes, a landslide, a rock slide. Talk in the lake with with Katkushak the land had a slide. Tlein, wooch, a big slide. So wooch is the verb you would use to talk about like some sort of landslide or rock slide or snow slide. But then it has a name, which would be Kuhaantí. So ʼatudli.átk, avalanche, ʼatudli, rock slide, Kuhaantí, mudslide. We've had some really bad ones in this area over the last couple of years. So a long time ago in Lituya Bay, there was this huge underwater rock slide. So from that, there was a giant wave. So this giant wave crashed over it, right? So Chiyosatan on its own would be the water's rough. A kanach Chiyosatan would be a wave washed over it. Shtakhatwe as kwani ach awatzet. Which we might need. See if we can find that. So we'll go into the verb dictionary. We'll look for tzet. So if you say awatzet, so you're going to look for tzeit. So it's going to be a S apostrophe EIL apostrophe. And so there's different ways to probably use this verb. So it means to tear something. And it has a bunch of different uses. This is the verb some of our speakers like to use when talking about rippies or pull tabs when we gave them a name. This is the verb you would use to talk about pulling up spruce roots. Like if you can go gather spruce roots, you would use this one. Peeling bark off of a tree. For something to be burst open. For something to tear through. To peel the skin of a fruit. To peel something. And then there's this kind of, there's these two that are very similar. And it means to tear away from a fish hook, like if a fish tore itself off of a hook, because then you see the ch built in there and the ya. So there you have a mouth and you have like a vertical surface. But there's also a cultural interpretation of this, which would be like I stood up to give a speech, and let's say someone said, "Tell the story of Lituya Bay." And I got up there and I started to, but then I got distracted and I started talking about the names of these trees. That got me to think about this boarding school that was in Wrangell. And then I remembered this uncle of mine who had a boat. And the next thing you know, like I'm just talking about all kinds of stuff. So that would also be this, like you really drifted from the subject there, pal. So it's a pretty funny verb when it's used that way. But if you say shtakatwe as kwani ach awatzet Tlein. So what do you think that was talking about?
All the trees got torn up by
the
roots.
They got torn off of the mountain. So when you say ach, that's from it. And so that could be picking things up, it could be removing, that could be leaving, but it's really a contraction of adach, so from it.
That makes sense. That's what confused me there.
So the ach, it's again coming back to these directional things that we're learning. Once we start to master them, which takes a while, then we start to sort of recognize them more. Because the goal here is like really start to realize what the boxes are. So the boxes is like, if Tlingit was these giant Bentwood boxes, there'd be a box of nouns, there'd be a box of adjectives, a box of adverbs. Those would be pretty small boxes. Then there'd be this box of direction, locational terms. That'd be a pretty good sized box. And then this big old box of verbs, right? You got a few other boxes, like there's little particles and interjections, which we'll take a look at, some important ones, especially as we translate. We'll just keep seeing these little things pop up like tla and cha and ch. And so we'll talk about those as we encounter them. But one of the goals is like as you fill your boxes with things, you start to get to a point, I think, where you're like, okay, I learn a whole bunch of stuff. And now I'm learning a little bit of those things and lots of verbs, how the verbs work, and just learning more and more verbs. So that once you hear ʼatudli.átk, you're like, oh yeah, that has to do with tearing, right? So you start to get to that point where you're like, okay, I know that root is like something like this, and then you'll learn how verbs are built off of those roots. Okay. Shashaki ya as. Kleinach as away wuti. Shashaki.
There was one tree.
Mm-hmm. One tree left. Uyech is like remaining. And uyech, it has different uses as well. So like if we're all taking turns reading, you might hear me say adusa uyech, which would be who's left, who hasn't gone yet. And it was on the top of the mountain, Shashakik. Qaneke uwe'ik ya as. Khatia achchike.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, so the tree begins to yell, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Diyanach. So diyanach is, there's a few of these directional ones that you're going to just see, and I think you're just going to think about them a lot. One of them is niya or yina, which is the area of, the direction of, or sometimes shielding. Like if the name Huna comes from Hunya, which is the shielding from the north wind. So you're going to find some of these ones, Nia, and then you're going to start to see it all over the place. Another one is Tlia. So Tlia is farther over. So you might say Tlianach, this area farther over. And then another one is Diyanach. And Diyanach is across, usually a body of water. So if we're standing here on this shore, and I might be talking about something right over here, Diyanach yisitinigehwe janmu. On the other side of the lake, do you see that mountain goat? Right? So they're kind of important terms, but then it's like as you learn more Tlingit, you'll start to realize how these things work. So this tree is on the top of the mountain yelling, can you hear me? Ya diyanach jaguta as khone kutzati.
I think I heard Asquan Kudzati, so like maybe are any of you alive, or something about the trees being alive and their lifetime.
Ya diyanach jaguta as khone kutzati. On the other side of the lake, there's these other trees were there. So kudzati does mean to exist, but you could just also say like it was there. Like it's some of these things, they vary based on context. So, I was teasing my kids the other day because it's gotten cold this last week. Like we just sort of like someone turned the cold switch And my kids, they just like walk out of the house without jackets. It's just something they do all the time. And so I'll say, "Yisikuke kinekati kutzati." And they get real mad at me because I was like, "Do you know jackets exist? Do you know that?" Right? And so like, because I want them to bring jackets when we go places, because then sometimes we have to walk across a parking lot or something, and they're freezing and trying to look cool. But it's hard to look cool when you're just freezing, right? So, but kudzati can also just mean it was there, right? If you're telling a story, and you might say, I would just say, oh, there was a house there. Because there's also, we're going to encounter this other story later, where they'll go to look for someone, or they'll say, then they saw they weren't there. It doesn't mean they don't exist. Because sometimes in the right context, someone might say, Wasad air fryer, and someone will probably say, the word for it doesn't exist. So in that context, you're saying there's no word for it. But in other cases, it might mean it's not there. So on the other side of the lake, there's these other trees. We're calling them asquani because they're characters in the story. So the Kwani part means we talk about them like they're people. Hasu qone ke hasu ik qone ye has ayaw sakha isaw tuwa ach. Hasu ye, well, I'd say ye has ayaw sakha. Ye has ayaw sakha. Ever heard that one? Ayaw sakha.
So that they heard him?
Yeah, so there's this whole thing. We're going to do like ach and ka and tan and neek because they're very similar.
They said.
Right. And yeah, they said. And so when we look up this ka verb, and this is one, once we get into stories, we're going to see this one all the time. So we'll go down and we'll look up ka. And this is the one that we're talking about. And the two that you're going to hear most often is going to sound, in the perfective, it'll sound like ye yawa ka. When you hear ye yawa ka, you're getting ready for the quotations. This is what they said. They said this. If you hear ye ayawsaka, they said this to them. So now you've added an object, which is the person this thing is being said to. And this verb is used to talk about a specific thing that was said. So like, let me tell you the words that they said. Like, Walter Sobolov said this thing. And then you're going to quote them, right? And it's a little bit different than neek. So the other one you might hear is akawanik, would be like they told them information. They told them about it. So it's more of like a general topic, whereas this one is specific things said. So Jakut asqwani qadzati, these other trees exist. Aqa'awe yehas ayawsaqa. And then they said to, who'd they say it to? What do you think?
The first tree.
A first tree, right? It like sets up a main character. Isau tuwa ach. Should we go to the, so here's the ach verb. This does mean to hear or to make a sound. It has both of those meanings. So here we'd have awa ach, heard a sound. Ausa ach, prolonged a sound. At wusa ach, listened to it. Yidzach, it echoed. And so in this, and then you have Autla'ach played an instrument. Kautla'ach couldn't, kind of misheard them, rehearsing songs. I sao tu wa ach. We heard your voice. So this is what you say. And so there's some different things, right? Because if you could say, ich wa ach, I heard you. But then it means I heard you walking around. I heard some noise you were making. Isach wa ach, I heard your voice. I heard you talking. I heard you singing. So that's what those trees said back to that first tree. We heard your voice. Awa chetzin atutas awa. Atutas awa ti chetzin. So they gave this tree strength. Qone awa ajiwanak tsus ani shashaki. Qone aya yisas kwani arshayech. Actually, Wujin has Yejiwune. So being heard and having a response gave this lone tree that was surviving strength and courage, and it began to drop its pine cones and rebuild a forest. And that's how I feel about our language today. Sometimes you might feel like there's just a few left, but it's that listening and hearing each other that gives us the courage to keep going. So this is land of the ʼatudli.átk people. The ʼatudli.átk also used to live there. I heard this story from a ʼatudli, master speaker and storyteller named Clarence Jackson. I use it a lot as a metaphor, and I wanted to just sort of share that with you as a listening exercise. And there was another one that Donawak, Austin Hammond, used to say. He used to point to the mountaintops and say, like, you see those trees way up there? Existing on the mountaintops with deep snow and high winds. Just think of how difficult that life is for them. But you know how they can exist? Because underneath the soil, their roots are intertwined like hands that hold each other together. And that's the way our culture is. We're holding hands on the world. So, like, this is the time where it never gets easier from this point. But that's okay, right? Because you're out in the waters and you've got your paddle and we're paddling together. We're going to keep encountering Tlingit. We're going to keep thinking about the way that the language functions. And then we're going to just keep adding more concepts to what we're, the Tlingit thought world will continue to be revealed to us. And we'll continue to learn more and more words, more and more verbs. We'll be translating bigger and bigger things in both directions. Okay, this one's going from Tlingit to English. This one's going from English to Tlingit. So hang in there. You're a tree in this forest of learners. Thoughts or questions?
Oh, it was just, that really came to life for us this summer because we had heavy winds that blew trees down. And I remember we were out at Tagish chopping them up, and Mark Wedge was there too. And he was talking about, we were talking about, always take down that one and take down that one. He's like, don't take down too many because it weakens the whole root system and then they'll all fall down. So it was like, that all those trees being there, function as a purpose. If you start to take one or two or three out, then it weakens the whole thing.
Yeah, that's cheese. Okay. Okay, Johan. So let's take a look at a couple more direction and location things. So there's a few different illustrations here. The idea for this goes credits given to Kyle Worrell, who was teaching Tlingit and started illustrating all of these things. So we're going to sort of look at this from a big picture, then we're going to zoom in. So what this is showing you is a few critical concepts in terms of how two things can relate to each other, using a box as an example, and in this case, an apple. But what we'll see is there's different ways we can talk about where things are at, and then whatever it's framed, however it's framed in this question, so if that's the way it's being asked, then we will answer it in that same way. So you see yeyati, and then answering with yeyati. So there are different ways to ask where something's at, but if it's being asked in a certain way, then we tend to respond in that same way. So for starters, let's all say, Guksayeyati wekak.
Kuhaantí wekak.
Guksayeyati wekak. So that's saying, where is the apple? How would I say, where is the dog, using the same sentence structure?
Kuhaantí wekak.
Yeah, right? So then we see there's a pattern. Substitute that now. So this first one, everybody say, Kuhaantí wekak.
Kuhaantí wekak.
Kuhaantí wekak.
Kuhaantí wekak.
How does that translate into English? The apple is on the box. And we would say on top of, right? And so, but in Lingi, you just say kuk. Okay. So then we also see, you could, for this one, you could say ka. That's fine. There are a few of these where this could just turn into a long form of that vowel. You'll see that. You'll hear people say that. And it's long because there's a has been absorbed by the ah. Okay, everybody say Kuhaantí wekak.
Kuhaantí wekak.
Kuhaantí wekak.
Kuhaantí wekak.
And just instead of translating the whole sentence, where is it in English?
The apple is under the
Under
box.
below the box.
Below or beneath the box. Under is fine. That's fine. Everybody say Kuhaantí wekak. Okay, so you could also, if I wanted to say the cat's in front of the house, hit Kuhaantí wedouche, right? Just noun substitutions, right? Here's a pattern you can substitute. Shukuk is in front of. No. Kuhaantí wekak.
Kuhaantí
wekak. Where is that kak at?
Behind?
Behind. It's behind the box. I couldn't figure out. A little hard to figure out how to illustrate that, but Kuhaantí wekak. Kuhaantí wekak. Where's it now?
Inside.
Inside. It's got to be closed. Kuhaantí wekak. Kuhaantí wekak. And I like this one. You know, and so where is it now? What do you think?
Beside it.
Yeah, beside it. So, from what I understand, there was a hit. There was a house. There was a hit. There was a hit in Tu'a, and then they built one next to it. So they call it ʼatudli.átk, hit, the house in the area next to it, and that became ʼatudli.átk. ʼatudli hit tan, and then ʼatudli.átk. Kuhaantí with ʼák. Kuhaantí with ʼák. Where is it now?
Queen?
Between the boxes. So ʼák is between, right? That one's storyteller, he had another name, ʼák, between the trees. Kuhaantí with ʼák. Kuhaantí with ʼák. Where's it now?
Inside
See,
the
In
box.
an open box, shallow
Yeah.
box.
So we might say inside and in for using English. But for Tlingit, this one is t, this one is ka, this one is also ka. The reason why they're both ka is because if I just move this box any old way, the apple might fall out. Fall off or fall out. Okay, any questions about that? Okay. So now we'll change the question. So now the question is, everybody repeat. Gusuwek. So this does not have a verb. Yeyati is a verb, which is to be. This is verbless. So that means all your answers will now be verbless. So instead of saying yeyati, you're just going to get w. And just take a look at how those words work. So here it is. So this one goes to kagu. Okay. Next one. Okay, so this is a cisco. So now we're going to use some motion. We're going to use some different verbs. So this first one's going to be a position verb. So a position verb means something is located somewhere. And in this case, hun is the verb, right? So now we're using a question, like a where is question. But hun likes to have this suffix t associated with the noun. So in this, oh, I have to close this door. We'll take a break. Oh, wait, we got two more. Gut sahan with cisco. Okay. Then we zoom in.
Where's he?
Katan with cisco. So how would we translate that?
Yeah.
He's standing under it.
Standing on.
He's
Top.
on the
Yeah.
box.
Oh.
The owl is standing on the box.
That's what the hun is.
Hook tayit hun with Cisco.
Hook
Good.
tayit
Hun
hun
with Cisco.
sis.
The owl is standing under the box, or the owl's under the box.
Yes, the owl is standing under the box. Hook shukat hun with Cisco.
Hook cut hun with
With
sis.
Cisco.
How do we translate that?
The owl is standing.
The owl is standing in front of the box.
Yeah, away. Hook egg hun with Cisco.
Tick
Hook
hun.
egg
Cisco.
hun with
Hun
sis.
with Cisco.
The owl is behind the box.
Yes, this one does look ominous. For some indigenous cultures, like an owl is very scary. So I apologize if this is scary.
What happened to the T at the end?
Yeah, I might have to change this animal. I'll do a new version of this, and we'll because we changed the name of that little meeting owl, so I'll have to be a little bit more. I'll just make it a raven or a maybe like a pigeon.
Question.
Ah,
There is a T at the end of the other directionals. What happened at the end of A?
so egg likes to close with a K, and so sometimes what happens is like it says, well, I like to close with this thing, so you can keep your T. I'll just use the letter K, and so that's what happens here. It's kind of rare, but you end up with a bit of an exception now. But I do think you could say hook 8 hun with Cisco.
It's really hard to say a K then a T really fast. You know.
Egg hun 8 hun. Yeah.
Just say it's inland. You'll get away with it.
That's my dialect. It's my dialect.
The Hawaiians got a hold of the T and turned it to a K.
Oh yeah, there you go. That does happen. My tai'i, my kai'i. Okay. Hook toot hun with Cisco.
Hook toot hun with sis.
My brain really wanted to go toot. That's not how it goes. Hook oct hun with Cisco.
Hun
with
Cisco.
Hook oct hun with Cisco.
Hook hun with sis.
Hook cut hun with Cisco.
Hook cut hun with sis.
Okay. Okay. Last one of this series. And you guys will be the last ones to see this little Cisco. It's going to change after this. Okay. So now we have a motion verb. So because we have a motion verb, we're going to see how the suffix changes, right? So we had the w, we had the t, we had the now we're going to get the underline x because there's some kind of a long motion or repeatedly coming back to motion. Wait, let me close the door. Hold on.
Something that also talks about it being a living thing.
Okay. Oops. Last one, then we'll take our break. So here the verb is going to be yendekin, which is in the act. It's flying right now. So the question is, Guksa yendekin with Cisco.
Saw you.
Yandakin with sis.
Hook kanach yendekin with Cisco.
Hook kanach yandakin with sis.
Cisco.
So the other thing you're going to look at with these directionals is how they do change. So kach, you could say kach, but it would be like it's flying over and touching the top. So you'd use kanach to say going over. Zisk kanach wujakain we wasus. The cow jumped over the moon, right? And so that's, but then also like what we'll look at a little bit later is what happens to the tone. Like there's just some things you just have to kind of memorize in terms of what the tone does. Some of them, they're predictable, but other ones you're like, oh, well, it kind of likes to do this thing, and you'll just catch it. Sometimes they just all flatten out. So this one is pretty handy. It means going along the face of is really what it means. But this is what you'd say if like we're going to the store and you got in to tell me this really interesting story and you just kept on driving past the store. You're driving past the store. So yanach means to go past something as well. So you had kanach, which was going over. What do you think the kade is doing?
Going on to.
Yeah, it's going to land on that box.
Or at least get really close.
Right, yes. What happened?
That's a different verb.
It's a different verb.
It's not flying anymore.
What do you think that verb might be?
Landed?
Landed?
Landed in?
Landed, yes. So this is for a verb to, or a verb, it's for a bird to land or an airplane. So you could say, the airplane landed on Akwan land. It also means for a person to squat. And this is also the same verb root for an octopus to walk, because it squat walks. That took me a while to get a speaker to tell me that one. Okay, so that's it for these ones. Just sort of thinking about just another aspect of how these work, right? So we're still on this one thing related to another. So the next thing is these sort of global concepts, right? And so I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this because I want to take our break and get to translation. But this whole slideshow is up. And I think the important one is this one, which shows like there's just a bunch of these concepts. And there's lists of these things in that chapter, and which introduces them in order of most common ones to the more rare ones. So you have things like base of or the trunk of, upstream, downstream, also north, south, on, up high, across a body of water, way out to sea, heading out to sea, in a shallow container, heading from the sea to the shore, heading from the inland to the ocean, heading from the ocean to the inland, going in, coming out, being under. So there are some concepts that do need to, there's a couple of them where like which one you use depends on where you're at. And the biggest is probably the ocean one. So if you're in the inland, if you're upland from the ocean, to go towards the ocean would be ek or ik. And if you're at the ocean, going inland would be dak. If you're at the shore, then going out to sea would be dak. And if you're out at sea, going to the shore would be yun. So that's one where it's like you have this flexible series of them depending on where you're located. Similarly, if you're in a building, gone is outside. But if you're in a building, ne is coming into the building. And if you're outside of the building, ye is going into the building. So there's a couple of them that which one you use depends on where you're at. And those are sometimes a little tricky to keep in mind. But there's whole lists of them. And maybe I guess before we take our break, we'll look at the most these are the most interesting ones to me. Dock and dock. They are opposites, complete opposites. And they both have several different meanings. Out to sea from the shore, from the shadows or in the hiding out into the open, for precipitation to fall, or for something to go on to fire. And dock is the opposite of all of those things. I guess there is one more on here, which I guess I should put. So dock is also out in front of the body, and then dock is going back to the body.
Yeah, like if you had like evaporation from the ocean coming up in the clouds, would that be dock?
I think it would be dock. So when I was talking to my kids about it and I was trying to explain the water cycle, I would just say dock wuha
I mean,
wehin
this guy.
akakus husati. So the water went up and became a cloud.
I mean, I guess this guy is going away from the water, and so is the like evaporating water.
Yeah. So it's pretty fun. It's pretty wild to think about those things and how they are all the same word in Tlingit, like all of those different things. Okay. Okay. Come back at around 5 till. Chish.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, we are back. So here's this yeyawaka, yeyawsaka, just sort of like highlighting these verbs that we're seeing in this story. Cold, difficult, arriving, dying off, being called, moving in a mass, or in this case, dying off from someone. Kind, hardworking or ambitious, existing, is, being, kind of, inspecting or observing, helping, leading by the hand, to be, so it could be, walking or walked, wanted, scooping with the hands, is drinking, don't drink it, they said to them, you are waking it, a place of rest, forbidden, what you were doing. So this kind of gets us up to where we were. We're translating this together. So even though I'm asking you folks to get up to like sentence 15 or so, like we're all doing this together. So it's about a 30-sentence story. So we're almost to the halfway point. Can I get someone to read sentence number 11?
Go ahead.
Agawut kuaha wudashayi weka de hani dusik.
Okay. Akawut kuwaha wudashayi weka de hani dusik. Any verbs here?
Koaha and Wudashaya Shayi. That's it.
And we got to grab the akawut kuwaha. So There should be some familiar words, like, so here's kasha, the honey again, and do seek. So as far as the nouns, we should be able to get them fairly quickly. What's kasha, the honey?
The leader,
And do seek.
his daughter.
Okay. So the first verb phrase is agawutkuaha. Anybody have any luck with this one?
Kuaha is turn.
Yeah, it's for like some, like generally kuaha is for some sense of time to arrive. So you say eat kuaha, it's your turn. You could say takt kuaha, winter has arrived, it's become winter. Or what about agawut kuaha? Do we find that anywhere?
Is that like
I thought
celebration?
it's time for it.
Celebration
arrived.
time for it?
Well, agawut kuaha means the time has come for it.
Okay.
Whatever, and then the thing usually gets named later. So this, yeah, there's could be a whole number of things that we could list after that. So you could say agawut kuaha, qatichai. It's time for us to eat. You can have all kinds of different things. But as far as what this, so we have we had two of these. So we'll just get to the next one. And what about with the shayi?
Something about getting married is the
Right.
best I could come up with.
Yes. So what the shy would be for somebody got married. That's really what you're saying. And so there is another version of this where you have an object and a subject, and it's for the subject to marry the object, and you can also say wooch has with the shy, or wooch has with the shah. They married each other. But if you say agawut koaha with the shy, and then we sort of name someone afterwards. So how do you think we'd put those things together?
Time came for the leader's daughter to marry.
Yeah. Well.
Mhm.
Sheesh. Ask questions if you got them, or else we'll just keep rolling along. Who wants to do 12? Who wants to read it?
Sin ashtika awusha anyadich siti duch.
Okay. Shanash chiqa awasha an yedich sati duchuch. Any verbs here?
Awasha siti.
Yeah, away. We'll just grab the thing that they are. So non-verbs. What about shanash chiqa?
Rich man.
Wealthy? Rich people?
Let's say person in this case. I mean, it could be man, it could be person. It's one of those kind of ambiguous pronouns where it could be one or the other. They look identical. And then duchuch.
Her husband.
Okay.
Well, it could be his husband, but I'm guessing her.
Yeah, it could be their husband, right? So again, like there's no gender
It's her,
in
their
this,
husband. Yeah.
but so we could say there. It's kind of set up right here, and so we do know it's her husband, right?
Daughter.
What about our Shah?
That she
I got
married.
it.
With marriage.
She married him or her. Yeah. She married him.
Right. And what about this verb?
Kind or good looking. Yeah.
I came up with nobleman.
Yeah, so yaksa on, but yeah, on yadi is This term, I think, deserves like just a little bit of explanation. So an yadi does mean noble person, but technically, what an yadi is, it's the high caste people of a place. So where you live, whoever's clan owns that land, the people who are high status in that clan are the an yadi. That's technically how this word works. So not everybody's an yadi. It is a term that has specific social and cultural implications, but then you would say they are a noble person. But again, it's sort of like how, as you do this stuff more and more, you will have a bunch of decisions to make in terms of how you translate things. And then we could go through, like if we wanted to, so we're kind of doing a piece-by-piece translation. You can see it here. And if you wanted to say, she married a wealthy person, her husband is a noble person, right? However you want to like rearrange those words. So we're not going to do all the fine-tuning here. We're just sort of doing the walkthrough so we make sure when this book comes out, we know what we're reading. $13. Asakakwatu.
Elhi wiyat idach wooch hat wudeshayi ushkeyi ʻatudli hastu kade jiwagut.
Sheesh. Heshi wuyat itach wushas wudeshayi. Klishik at qone hastu ka deju de good. I always hear that as short and high, but it's long and low in this case. Verbs. Where are they at? Where my verbs at?
Yiwuyat.
Wudashai, has wudashai, wooch has wudashai.
Grab woosh has, yeah.
Judigoot.
We kind of got to grab all of this stuff too. So we're kind of grabbing verb phrases. Yeah, because bane it's an adverb, so it's linked to that verb. Okay, so really only two things that are not verbs in this whole, so we've got this, it's a pretty long sentence, and there's only two things that are really not a verb. So what is a itdach? Anybody get that?
Following from out of? Maybe?
Yes.
I came up
so
with
that's
after.
the literal. Yeah, so after.
The literal. I don't know how it plays into the whole sentence, but that's what I got.
So itdach is a time marker in a story. So for example, there was one speaker who started her speech. She said, Yak'ei sitkam san itdach, which would be good afternoon. So itdach is just after something.
Okay.
So after that, and then after it, but this is how Tlingit likes to do things in terms of like, and we'll see it's linked to this thing when we get to it. And what is a shishakei at?
It's an evil thing.
Yeah, it's an evil thing or a bad thing. Okay, so now we've got to get to some of our verbs. Did anybody find heshi wuyat?
The closest I could come was something related to walking.
Okay.
I came up with not long in time, not long after. Not long after that, I guess, would be that first part. I don't know.
Yeah, so let's go look for yacht, and we'll just go see. I think for this one, well, I know where a good example of this is, so we'll just go to it. What do I go for? So we'll go into this dictionary. We'll go into the verb section under yacht. So here's the Y's coming down. We've got ya, and then yacht. So here's yacht, the verb root, and it does have ye on it. So ye is a thematic prefix which marks time. So this is for something to be a long time. If we look at the examples, yaki yiyayat, the days are long. Kashinayat, not long ago. Wasa yakwayat or yikwayat. How long? Oops, I should say are. How long are they going to stay? And then we have kashiwuyat. So we do have this right here. So it wasn't a long time. In terms of like how narratives work, there's these things are working together. Like that's a really nice way to transition time-wise when you're telling stories. It wasn't long after that, right?
Is there a reliable way for us to be able to tell what is part of the stem and what's part of all of the jumble beforehand as an experience?
Yeah, so you're usually looking for the last syllable. It's usually the last syllable or the second to last. Sometimes there is a suffix. So if we just sort of go back through our verbs, just thinking of like identifying the verb root. Át, ich, gut, hich, sak, eat. But this one's saw, on, ak, ti, da, she. So that one does have a suffix, right? Tan, teat, good, goo, quach, suffix. Na, suffix, right? Ka, get, sa, nuke, suffix.
Well, and I think more precisely, my question is, how do we tell within that last syllable what's part of the root and what's part of the before stuff? So, what is there a way for us to know that it's yacht as opposed to ya or ot or whatever else?
Yeah, so if it were ot, there would be a glottal stop there. Like there would have to be a glottal. If the verb root starts with a vowel, it's gonna need a glottal there. So you would have like that. And so you will start to recognize stuff like if you see w or wa, or there's this thing as you see more and more of these, you'll say, okay, that's the prefix. There's the prefix, right? And so this yi woo, it's a little bit unusual to have yi woo. But woo, we've seen that before, woo goot and things like that. But yeah, that's a really good question. And just in terms of like the more we look these up, and what you end up filling up in your brain is I think you end up filling your brain with a whole bunch of verb roots. You're like, okay, I want to learn all these verb roots, right? And so there is a document that you can look at. So like if you looked through the dictionary is organized, like you could just look at all these verb roots, but you got all this stuff in between them. So I think I should at some point publish just the roots, right? Because I've got a lot of them in here. And there is another document out there. It's not the easiest one, I think, to get into, but it's extremely useful. And so let's take a look at it. So this is Jeff Lear's Tlingit stem list. So he does have a list of a whole bunch of stems. We're going to ignore this page. We're going to ignore this page. We're going to ignore this page. There is useful information in here. But once you get into here, so he has them, these are listed as verb roots, but it's kind of, you're getting into his brain, which is a very incredible place, but also a very foggy place at times, because he's writing a lot of notes for himself, perhaps, to really understand how Tlingit works. And so there does need to be probably a translation of this document. And so I'll work on creating a list of verb roots. But if you did go in here, if you were looking for yacht, you might come down to YA and see if it's there. And you don't get it here because it should be listed under, is it under this one? Oh, there it is. So the other thing too is the way that we have decided to write verb roots now is to write them long and low. That way, if you go look for them, if you see yet, you're just going to go look for yacht, Y-A-A-T apostrophe. But here, there is some different markings, like there's an apostrophe here, this downward mark here, like, don't worry about that. We could deal with that later. But this does have a lot of stuff in here, but it's not really the most user-friendly document. And so I think it's interesting to go into and to look at, but there's a whole bunch of pencil markings and pen markings and stuff, so it could also be a bit much at times.
And where do we find that?
Oh, that's a good question. Let me go find. Let me make sure I know where it's at. So under our class, oops, I did resources. Hold on. So under Learning Tlingit and then Intermediate Tlingit on tlingitlanguage.com, the top part of this web page is all the resources that I think you need to study Tlingit. And if you go to Advanced Resources on this page, it's the Tlingit STEM list. And so you can look at that. And the Tlingit verb notes, I will say, if we look at this document, there is a bit of a hidden cheat code, I guess is what I call it. Let's see if I got this thing open. Yeah, I do, okay. So let me share. So here is this one, and there's a table of contents built into this. So if you come down and you open a consonant, you get the vowel options. If you open the vowel options, it does give you the verb root with a short-coded definition. So this one is yacht, long. So that is the verb root that we're looking at. And so I'll put together a list. And so, because I don't know if he has the time one in here. We could easily get, oh, you've got gangly, which is kind of fun. Jindliik, they have gangly arms. Yeah, I don't think it has the long time one in here. But that is, because the more that we do this work, translation has us looking directly at Tlingit verbs, trying to spot them, trying to spot the parts, and trying to interpret them. And it's a steep learning curve. But like if you do this, like through this whole story, do another story, you do start, because your mind starts to remember them. Because what you'll find is like once you see goot, this one is very common. You're going to run into ones that are used a whole lot. Tea, and you just start to spot them. Okay, so wooch has put the shy.
They married each other.
They married each other.
They married each other. And just in terms of like a word order thing, right? So your English brain might think, not long after that, they married each other. Oh. But what this is saying in Tlingit is, not long after they married each other.
Oh, okay.
Right. So just in terms of like the way Tlingit likes to do things, it presents information in a certain order, and you'll start to learn how to recognize that as you think it and think it. Then we got our last verb. Which includes an adverb, pone, which means to start to. And then hastukade judagut. Hey, there's one of those directional things. Look at that. Cool. We're just studying those.
An evil thing started to come on them.
Yes, and so if we go find judagut, which we'll go into, like I would go into the verb dictionary. Like, so I'm going into different resources for different things, but the verb dictionary is usually my go-to spot if I see a verb that I don't recognize. Because I say, okay, that's goot. I can go look up goot, and I'm looking for goot with j on it, right? And then there's also a declassifier. So the way these are organized, it's going to go 0 classifier, S classifier, L classifier, SH classifier. Then it's going to start adding thematic prefixes, ka, ta, j. There it is.
Mm-hmm.
To attack, to assault, to fall upon. So this one is most commonly used to talk about attacking someone, right? And so this would be the act of like pouncing on someone, or however you think of the attack, right? But in this case, and again, it's good habit to just go look up the underlined word once we look up that. So we'll go down to attack, just so we could see what kind of sample sentences we get. And we get hold on.
Wasayiti.
Okay, they're good at doing their jobs, these dogs. Okay. They attacked in our absence. Kate to eat judagut. The dog attacked them. And then there's a plural version of this, which is exactly the same, but gut changes to ot, just like in a lot of the walking verbs, right? So coming back, so we do see this judagut, and then we take a look. Kone hastukate judagut. So in terms of like literally, once you have kade, that's a little different than eat. So like if you said, Kone has to eat judagut, an evil thing attacked them. So in my mind, I'd be like, uh-oh, it was like a vampire or something, and I was like, rah, and it like straight up tried to like attack them. But once it switches from eat to kade, now we're moving it into a metaphor. And this takes a while to figure out. But when we go back and we saw there was this use of something similar up here, where it was it came upon them. So in this case, something did come upon them, but in a much more sinister fashion. So this is where I think it's so fun. Like there's people who are going to have this book. They're going to get a piece of paper that has the translation. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like having the translation, it helps them access it. But people who know Tlingit, they're going to spot like, whoa, that's a really cool way to say that thing. And so you could simply go, came upon them. But it also, it was this kind of attacking force. And so this is going to tie back to her disturbing these water spirits, just to give you a little teaser, inside scoop of what's coming. So it's a very classic structure of Tlingit. right? And Haida stories as well. Like, hey, go put these bones of the fish back into the water. Okay. Then the kid, the young person just throws them down on the beach and doesn't bring them all the way back to the water. And we're just like, uh-oh, here comes that evil force, right? And so it's a very classic trope. It's a very common trope in Tlingit stories. Is tells you what you're
Hence the
not.
moral of the story, right?
There you go. This is why things became unglued. Okay, might be the last one we do. So we'll see if we can get to 15. I think we can. Someone's got to read it.
Wanani sawe duhnahi ya shunahik.
Jeez. Oh, any verbs? Before I start highlighting stuff.
On the knee.
It does look like a verb. And so I do want to talk about, so the more we engage in storytelling, and even though like these are kind of big stories, this really helps. So you say like, a'itdach, hehiwuyat, a'itdach. That's a narrative device. It wasn't long after that. This is another narrative device. Wanani sawe. Instead of looking at what all these individual parts mean, I want us to just learn this as a phrase. When you say wanani sawe, you're saying at some point.
Oh.
Because when I first started engaging this phrase, I was like, is this a question? Like, at what point? But then as we talked it through and I talked to speakers about how it works, you're just flashing forward in the story, right? Which people do in English, right? Hey, this, this bad thing started to happen. Well, sometime later, right? That's just all that wanani sawe does. So you have aqa away, which would be after that. A'itdach, following that, wanani sawe. Now we've done a time jump in the story, right?
So what would be the literal translation of wanani, like before we use it?
I think wanani sawe would come from how did it happen?
Okay. Yeah, because I don't know. I came up with why is that? I'm like, okay, that's far away from at some point, but I
Right,
guess
and that's pretty close. But there's just like a few of these, like, and this is why like doing whole language is important, because we're just going to catch these things where it's like, yes, you can look at these parts, but remember this one as a big thing, and you'll start seeing it. Like if you read the Raven book, you'll see wanani sawe all over it. It's all over the place in there, and all you're doing is you're just saying sometime later. You're just time jumping in the story, but it's really neat to learn how to do that too. What's dunatchi?
Their wealth.
Yeah. And now we get the verb.
I got started to blow, which could mean started to vanish or started to go away. I don't know.
I got running out.
Yeah, so let's just go again. So here's kich. So we learn to spot that verb root. We'll say, oh, let's look up he. Right, so coming back to the verb dictionary, I think gets us the answers the fastest usually. So we'll go look for he, scroll down the X's, and we get there. And we do. So this is something the verb dictionary could tell us as well. It's like, well, there's a bunch of he verbs. There's a whole bunch of them. But we've got to find sh, because we see ya, shnachich. So that means sh is on there. And what we will learn is how to spot those things. They're called thematic prefixes or incorporated nouns. So you are putting a noun into a verb. Sh means the end of something. So that means the more we learn how to use this dictionary, we find he, we start looking way down because we're looking for something with sh on it. And that's it. To run out, to reach its end, to be used up. And this is the same, you could have killed off as well. But in this case, I do think you're having, and when we say yashanechich, we're running out, it's running out. Whatever the thing is. And it could be not too bad, but it could be bad, right? Yashanechich we uchkanhini, the gas is running out. Right? So in this case, their wealth. And so it's interesting too, as we come back and we think about how the translation works and just getting these two brains now. We have two brains. Some of you might have more than two, but the Tlingit brain and this English brain got to talk to each other. Because the Tlingit brain has to say what they're saying here is at some point their wealth began to fade, begin to run out, and begin to go down. Well, okay, let's pick up here on Thursday. We're out of time. You're about to find out a bunch of stuff. So again, what I do is I make a PDF of this whenever we're done with class. That PDF gets uploaded to our class website. So you will have this color-coded version. We're really only coloring the verb phrases here. We could go further and break these verbs down into every single component that's there. And maybe we'll do that at some point. But also once we get through line 30, you'll level up, and your reward will be the complete glossary of this story, which is pretty fun. Sheesh, any questions or thoughts before we go? Okay. See you folks on Thursday. Sheesh.
Figu iinyengwati.
May the force be with you.
Yeah. Katsini inyengwati.
Okay.
Sheesh.